All right, team, we are almost there with our most basic version of Hangman. And we are going to cover two components, but they're pretty similar to each other this time. So we are going to cover the logic for winning and losing. So let's give ourselves a couple of functions. So let's just check for win, and that's a function. And let's check for loss, and that's a function. We actually don't have to do a lot for these at this point. We are keeping track of our wrong guesses and the state of our spaces really nicely. And so you'll see that this ends up being pretty easy. But if you think about the logic for checking for winning, in the game, you've won when you flipped over all of the squares with letters, right? And so if we think about how we're keeping track of that, we have this array for each letter, which holds each of the letters in the chosen word, and it has a placeholder for each one if it hasn't been guessed yet. So if we were to loop over all of the items in the spaces, and if we were to check them to see if they are placeholders, we know if any of them is a placeholder, we haven't won yet. So let's start off by assuming that we have one. So let's set win to true. But for each item in spaces, if the item at that position is equal to that special placeholder that we're using, we know we haven't won yet. So win becomes false. And that's actually pretty easy. We can come down here and say, well, if we've made it through that whole loop and we have a win, that means that the game is over. So for now, I could just put some super simple text to say you win, let's put it at 250 and 300. So let's test this. Mustangs. And it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, because this function never gets called, silly. So let's call it inside our draw loop, just like we are with guess spaces. And so that says you win. So let's try that again. Boom, I win, right? So it's going through all of the items and spaces, and since none of them is a placeholder, we've won and we get down here. Now, I want the game to stop when I win or when I lose. So before we look at the logic for whether I've lost, we're going to need a way to keep track of whether the game is still going. So I'm actually going to create this new global variable, and I'm going to call it game on. And it's going to start at true, right? At the beginning of the game is on and we're still going. But if I come down here and I've won, let's say that game on at that point becomes false. So down here, let's say if the game is on, then we want to keep drawing the spaces and checking for our win. And if the game is not on, then we're going to stop doing that. So let's test that. Mustangs, I win. So now we let's just draw. Let's actually use the same background. So once the game is over, we're going to draw that same background over the screen before, and there are more attractive ways to do this. And then I'm going to keep the check for win in there, and that way that keeps showing. And let's actually call check for loss, which doesn't do anything yet, but it will in a minute. So let's restart. So now the game is on when we start. And as long as the game is on, we're going to keep drawing spaces. But as soon as the game is over, which is going to happen in check for win, and we're also going to have some logic for that in check for loss. But as soon as the game is not on anymore, draw the background over it. So just clear the screen and draw whatever's in check for win or check for loss. So check for loss is pretty straightforward, and it's actually kind of similar to check for win. Just like in check for win, we already had an array that we could check for, you can probably guess what the logic is to see if we've lost, right? And it's if we have too many wrong guesses. So let's just decide some threshold, right? So if wrong guesses dot length, and I'm gonna say 7 is a good number. So if you have more than 7 wrong guesses, the game is off, and instead of winning, you are gonna lose. And you should probably not a happy face, a sad face. And so let's test this now. So let's restart. So we don't have any wrong guesses, so I'll get a right guess, but then I'm gonna do a bunch of wrong guesses. Oh, and that was my 8th wrong guess, and so now I lose. And that's really it. So this is a pretty complete, but pretty bare bones version of Wheel of Fortune. So there are still some to-dos. So I'm just going to sprinkle some to-dos for you in here. So to do, you need to create a dictionary of words, and you need to do pick a random word from the dictionary, and use it as chosen word, right? Maybe there's a to-do in here. One of the pieces of bonus functionality could be to validate the user input. Almost certainly there's a to-do down here, which is to do better U1 screen, right? Maybe you animate something, and same thing here. So you can animate something, it could be colorful, you could put an image up there, maybe some instructions on how to restart and play again. But this is a pretty complete version of the game that you have at this point. This is not enough to get you a good grade on the rubric, so you need to spend some time looking at the rubric and thinking about what else you want to implement. But this is off to a great start, and I am looking forward to seeing your Wheel of Fortune games.